Yay! Okay, perfect. It looks like we are now successfully live streaming the OpenJS Foundation Standards Collab Space meeting for today, Tuesday, July 23rd, to our friends on the internet. You know, I always think of July 23rd as like JavaScript birthday day because there are several JavaScripters that I know who have birthdays on July the 23rd. So happy birthday, Rick Waldron, Paul Irish, a bunch of people. Happy birthday, July 23rd birthday, people from JavaScript Land. Any announcements other than birthday wishes from our community today? Yeah. Oh, well, okay, fair point. It is no one's birthday today. Nobody was born today. Any announcements from?
We have a board meeting on Friday, so we do have a public session. But if there's anything you'd like us to bring to the board, we are all ears.
All right, public board, and we also live stream those as well. So if you just want to watch on YouTube, you can do that too, or check out our calendar. Anything else, announcement wise, from project updates, celebrations, anything to share?
TC39 plenary is next week. If we have time today, we may want to go over the agenda a bit, see if there's anything folks would like to talk about. Particularly anybody here who represents OpenJS at TC39 officially. What else? Swag. Probably I've mentioned this group. There is a new community group at the W3C, which is SWAG, Security Web Application Guidelines, if I recall correctly. It's a lot of W3C working groups have an equivalent community group. So there is already a working group for security. So I kind of view this as the community group sort of partner of that. It was chartered fairly recently. And so they are meeting on Mondays at a time that conflicts, unfortunately, with the OpenJS security group meeting, which I have
30 minutes.
Them, which I mentioned, and Dan Applequist, who is one of the members of the W3C tag and who started the swag group, sounded like he wanted to move the time. So hopefully when they send out a new time or a new poll for the time, we can watch out for any conflicts with at least the more relevant meetings where we would want to have, or where we would be afraid of overlap, and then people that might otherwise attend would be in a different meeting. So, yep.
Yeah, I joined a couple of those, and I think it's addressing a really interesting space in the whole security space. So I think it's really good, i.e. being very focused on actionable, easily understandable material for web developers. And so that is a place where there's a lot of missing information. So I think it's a good group. It's a good place to be doing some work.
Are you consider yourself a member of the swag group? You're listed as a
participant? I am technically a member of the swag group.
Yeah, we should add you to our documentation for this group, that you are a member, and you can keep us updated of
oh Jesus
things going.
Oh, sorry. That was bad on another
I see Jordan's on there too, so maybe we'll sign him up for that as well.
Yeah, that's a good idea. Sign up Jordan. He's not there today, so do that.
I have to jump through a bunch of hoops for IBM to participate in any new thing, so I have not gone through that process yet, so I technically cannot participate.
You might be able to join the calls though. I'm just saying.
If they didn't conflict with the OpenJS security meeting.
That's a different problem. For sure.
Do we share any overlap with the Winter CG group?
In terms of meeting times, or in terms of topics?
Oh no, I like the membership.
Oh, the membership.
I think Jordan sometimes goes to Winter. Yeah, seeing a head nod from Rick. So maybe Jordan good question.
That said, at this point, it doesn't like Swag is very high level, very documentation focused. And so I'm assuming that the actual like topic overlap is very, very lightweight, if there's any. That might change as you know, as the Swag group gets more specific about what it wants to work on.
All right, this is some really great announcements and reminders from Chris. Kind of on the topic of W3C, the TPAC is coming up in September. So if folks were planning on going out to TPAC in Anaheim, that will be here before we know it. So make sure you make your plans and also tell your friends if you're going, so we can do a get together for folks from the community who will be there. Brian Cardell's just joined. Brian, just real quick, do you have any announcements or shares before we dive into our agenda?
Was there any further discussion about the board nominations open?
Oh,
I just mentioned that you were beating the bushes,
Okay.
and that, duly noted that people who are interested should think about it. I don't know that we want to, I mean, as a parallel organization, it's not clear we want to actually nominate somebody, but
Why though? Why? Is it okay to,
well,
I mean, it's not-
that was just off the top of my head. I don't know. Struck me as some, anyway.
I don't know why we wouldn't want to though. Like,
this is
Yeah, I
for
mean,
the-
if somebody
needs
like
to
you
fill the board.
really was passionate about it and needed a nominator, we could talk about it.
well, I think
Did it?
Toby is. I think Toby
Oh,
is
well,
already.
did we
mentioned it.
nominate Toby last time?
I was wondering. No, I think I nominated myself last time.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Are
but
you
I mean,
running? or-
we don't have to even talk about us doing the nomination, but it would be, I think it would be good to help shake loose ideas that somebody could nominate it. If we had
Yeah.
some.
Yeah.
I don't see why we would not nominate someone. Like I don't understand the reasoning behind this.
Oh, wasn't really reasoning. It was off the top of my head. Oh, we're kind of Linux Foundation is kind of a parallel organization to W3C. The optics might look funny. That's all I would, just a very vague thought, not a rational argument.
I
We're
mean,
not the Linux Foundation though. We're the JavaScript Foundation, the Open JavaScript Foundation.
yeah.
I mean, we're talking optics. This does matter.
Independently incorporated at that. Yeah. Mhm.
I would certainly defer to Robin on all questions of optics.
I'm fine with optics. I think we have an amazing, prestigious standards collab space. So if y'all want to nominate, I think that would
Okay, so
be a
yeah,
positive
I
thing, yeah.
withdraw my comment.
Yeah, and we are live recording. Stream.
So that is maybe like the more specific thing for today is nominations are being sought.
And discussion in Slack and everything would be good, I think, right?
Right.
Emails, whatever,
Yes.
mailing lists. But it's I think we have basically a couple of weeks left. Can't remember the date, but
That's what I was just I'm trying to dive through the copious amounts of W3C email to see if I can find.
It's coming quickly. I'm not
Yeah.
like so. Just full disclosure. I am wondering whether to run for the board again. Also because I've been on I am on the their audit committee. right now, the financial audit committee. Um, and I know that it's coming up quickly, right? And I am not formally or informally requesting the foundation to nominate me, just for information. But I do think that it would be good for the foundation to actually nominate someone. Number one, and number two, it's kind of like long to actually do this. And if we do want to do it, we should make this a decision quite quickly, essentially, because if not, it's too late, and then it doesn't work.
Yeah, the story pasted in that it's the
ninth.
ninth. That was the date I had on the tip of my tongue, but didn't want to say it since Dory was already looking it up. I just like to say one last thing here. Last time for the board nominations, I think almost no one, maybe no one, Toby might be the exception, like nominated themselves. And when it comes to the board, I think I like that as a pattern. Like if we can have people not nominate themselves to specifically because like, you know, why do you want to be on the board? Kind of, you know, does somebody else think that, you know, can somebody else make a case for you? I think is a stronger thing.
Yeah, that makes sense to me too. Yeah, so, and I certainly wouldn't object to us nominating Toby.
I clearly was not suggesting you would do that. Just heads up, right?
I'm very sure
I kind of like, I mean, this is a complete tangent. I kind of like don't really like this whole thing because it makes it very difficult for people who are not like well networked already to get someone else to nominate them in a timely manner, right? Which is, by the way, exactly what happened to me last time. And so it puts like people at a disadvantage to others, in ways that are not necessarily actually representative. And I agree, like it does like the existing network, etc., does add credibility, but it also creates like a real barrier to some folks. And so I'm not a super fan of the system, but that's like a different conversation. So let me ask you a super quick question here, to sort of like close this and go in the direction of where you were going to go to, Jory. Is like, what would be next steps here? For me, it would be two things. One would be the group should decide, is this something that the group is happy to do? And secondly, what would be the process for actually approving someone if we reached out to someone or if someone showed up? And would people want to actually do a specific outreach to specific candidates that they would like to see in that position?
I will personally, on behalf of no one but myself, reach out to candidates if we have good candidates, because I think it's important that we have good candidates. It's not new. I've been doing that for more than a decade. So like, not for the board of directors, but for other nominated elected things in W3C. So if you have thoughts, I would love to hear them.
So A, do we agree collectively that this is like we would actually want to nominate someone? And B, how do we decide who and when? Because if it's in 2 weeks, there's a lot of having filled the form, it is not a thing that you do like in 20 minutes. Like you have to have there's like, you actually have to write up a bunch of things. And it needs to get approval from the rest of this group or get into the murky, we've done this last minute again, which is not a pleasant position to be in for anyone.
Let me turn it back to you, Toby. Would you would you ask for a nomination from this group as opposed to doing it as the AC rep of your company?
So I am no longer the
Would you
AC
accept
rep
it?
of.
Oh, so you're not, so you would need a third party to nominate you if you wanted
Yeah,
to run forward.
yes, I am in discussion with a third party. Uh, for the not for the record, but for the record, given like where this conversation is happening. But like it's more of a question of principle. Like I've literally been in this situation where like things are very last minute and then they can't happen. And so I think that if this is something that we care about, then we should do it properly and make decisions upfront and have a process for actually approving people. Even if it's a light process, right? And if we don't want to do it, that's also fine. But it's unfortunate if we're kind of like on the fence and then have to make a decision on August 8.5. That's my point.
Yeah, that's good. That's a good point.
Brian, you're muted. I would like to kind of wrap this topic. I'm
That's okay.
not, yeah. As soon as, but it sounds like, you know, Brian continuing to do the outreach that he has done, as he mentioned, for quite a long time, encouraging folks to apply. Toby, I think, you know, if you were to want to go forward with the nomination, this seems like a group of people who obviously support you. But you know, I don't think with 2 weeks to go, we want to worry too much right now about a process for a nominee that we don't have.
I mean, the process is jury decides.
Well, no, I mean, we decide and I just do the thing, but
Well, okay.
yeah.
But well, ultimately, you're the assessor of consensus.
Yeah, I guess that's true.
Okay.
That is true. So Toby, can we follow up offline about your application?
I just want to be clear. Like I don't like to be like I'm not like I'm specifically not asking for this, but I'm saying if Brian is reaching out to people and we don't have a process for this, it doesn't make any sense. That's the only thing I'm saying. I'm saying like either we want to do this and then we should say, okay, like maybe we can
I'm
make a
not sure
firm
that Brian
decision.
is reaching out to people to say that we at OpenJS want to nominate them. I think he's more reaching out to people to say you'd be a great candidate. Have you considered? And of course, like they can do that nomination as well through Regalia if the person were to need it. So I mean that, and each of us who are employed elsewhere do have those sort of forums. If you're if you're part of a company that has membership in W3C, I think that's one of the strongest things, you know, that we can do would be to leverage those memberships to put forward candidates from that perspective too. So see this, what this is. Yeah, and to Brian's point, it's not just the nomination, but also endorsing a quality nominee, whether somebody else brought them forward or whether it was OpenJS's nominee. You know, this is one part of the toolkit, not the only.
Okay, cool. So essentially the answer to my question is we don't want to do this. You know, if someone just shows up next week, like in 2 weeks, we'll figure out something at the last minute.
Yeah, I mean,
Which is fine.
Yeah, I mean, it is the last minute today. So, you know, like it's,
well,
because today is the 9th is, you know, is here before we know it. So, yeah, nominate, endorsing.
we can wrap this up. That's fine.
So if anybody, me, Toby, Brian, whoever wants a wants to run and needs a nomination, start a, you know, an offline conversation with Jory and the appropriate people, right?
All I heard is Mike wants a nomination. That's
Yeah, yeah. My champion.
No, I
wants
do
to
not
get on.
want to
Yeah,
nominate.
I know.
I was.
Did we nominate Mike without his approval? Because that would be interesting.
No.
Now I'm much more interested to actually figure out a process for
oh.
That's how they never, you
All
know.
right, so
Okay. So let's move on to the next topic, or there's kind of 3 items that I have for us to kind of prioritize today. One is an issue that didn't get tagged with the agenda, so it didn't get populated in my agenda notes, but Toby had an FYI on the Open Policy Alliance response. And so, Toby, there's been, you know, a handful of different activities around CISA guidance and so on. I'm just curious if you wanted to give a update on the call on, this is issue 293.
yeah, I'm just trying to find the issue because
I'll drop it in chat for you.
oh yeah, thank you.
Mhm.
Yeah, so there is this new thing called the Cyber Incident Reporting for Critical Infrastructure Act, which is an act that CISA was made a request for comments for, which it then extended to July 3rd. The Open Policy Alliance was working on a response. All of this was done sort of like very late, and then exactly like we would do a decision on who to nominate to the board of the 3C in a couple of weeks if we ended up there. And no, essentially it was done like very late. And there was a request from the Open Policy Alliance to have the organization OpenJS sign the comment that was made, to which I participated in a very sort of like distant way, but I was on a bunch of calls and made a bunch of comments. And because it felt super clear that essentially, as I put there, like no action was more harmful than actual action, I went go ahead and sign it. Just did double check it was Robin before doing so. Essentially, what this legislation is proposing to do is to require that when you're aware of a leak or an that could be imputed to you software that you're responsible for, you would need to inform all of the organizations of the US government that are relying on that software. And so that just doesn't make any sense really for open source. Like it would be impossible for open source to do this. And so essentially there was that's essentially what among other things, what the response that the Open Policy Alliance wrote says. Do folks have like more questions about this?
I don't have any questions. I think maybe just, well, I guess this is a question for which I will partially answer. You know, where are there spaces that community members can get involved, you know, to learn more about the act, to, you know, start to track and understand and weigh in on how this impacts potentially their project. So I don't know, Toby, if you want to. answer that first.
Well, I mean, actually answering so the request for comment period is closed, right? That's why we made a comment. I don't know what the next steps are. And I'm relying on the Open Policy Alliance to do the legwork here, which is why we're part of the alliance, right? Is also to be aware of this like earlier on, as early as possible. So, and I also don't think that it would scale if like every project starts to, sort of track something like this. So the whole point is, because I mean, the whole point of like having the liaison and the Open Policy Alliance is precisely to sort of like figure this out in a way that's limits impact on projects while trying to do so in a manner that is manages scarce resources as best as possible. So the answer is I don't know, and I think it is good that it is that way. If that makes sense, Robin.
Yeah, I would just add one thing about CISA. 2 weeks ago, I participated on a panel at a government event hosted by OECD. And it was essentially CISA and their counterparts around the world. And the topic was cybersecurity. And the first day was pretty much open source. I was really impressed by the level of knowledge and sophistication that these government agency cybersecurity leads have on open source and developers. So I think that policy where we have the comment was quite alarming, but in the real world, hopefully we should, I mean, I don't want to be too much of an optimist, but I think that that hopefully we wouldn't see anything that what's the word? Crazy. Move forward. So yeah.
I mean, generally, I think that the way this works works pretty well, right? We have legislators that create legislation and that they, have open different channels to get public feedback, and we have increasingly we're organized as a community to have different groups that check on those. And then those groups go back to the community, like to try to get like input and like funnel those back in. So I mean, overall, I think like as as a community and in our relationship with legislators across the world, we've matured like really quickly in the last like 2 or 3 years. Through intense pressure and it was fairly unpleasant at some points. I'm not going to lie, and it still is like pretty stressful. But I think like it's the overall system is working as it should, and so I would both agree with you, Robin, but also point out that the fact that nothing crazy is coming out of those is precisely because those processes are happening and we're contributing to them, right?
And maybe Europe,
making statements of that point,
yeah,
of that,
and maybe
of that
Europe
nature.
paved the way with CRA for the community to get a little more organized. But CISA also is staffing up with open source experts in their division as well. So you're right, it has evolved quickly. It felt slow probably with CRA, but I know.
Yeah.
But we do have to stay engaged. So there are I think a lot more opportunities on the policy front for community folks to get involved. So
I mean, I'm also happy to discuss. I was going to add I'm going to request another business point on the CRA and on the work that the Eclipse Foundation and the Open Regulatory Compliance Working Group is doing there, because they're one of my clients, and I'm leading the technical aspects of this effort, and so I think it would be really good to have a liaison with this. So I'm happy to have a conversation about this. But yeah, no, I think there's there's a lot of work happening there, and I think it's good to keep it's good for the community to keep an eye on what's going on and contribute at the right time and in the right ways.
Okay, any other questions or discussion on the OPA/CISA/ topic? I'm going to move us to the agenda for next week's plenary meeting. Typically, we do a sort of readout of any liaison updates. We're going to be short on time this week, so TC39 agenda for next week. We also have Leia, and so I'd love to hear about tag last week, Leia, after that. But Chris, what do you want to give a quick highlight of the plan for the TC meeting next week and any big topics we should be collecting input on?
I mean, usually the things that are considered the big things are anything moving that are going for stage advancement and higher stage advancement generally. So right now it looks like there are 3 things going for stage 3. One's the internationalization locale info update. There's an atomics.pause, aka microweights, that's going for stage 3. Regular expression escape going for stage 3. That is championed by our colleague Jordan, who is not here today, but usually is here. And that's it for stage 3. Then there's is error for 2.7, is template object for 2.7. Jordan responsible for both of those as well. And then decimal's been kicking around a long time, and got stage 1 not that long ago, and is returning to be proposed for advancement to stage 2 for the second time, maybe the third time. I thought we were pretty close last plenary, so I haven't been following it that closely, but I would imagine if they're coming back for stage 2 again so soon, and the time box is only 30 minutes, that it's probably pretty close or going to get it. But there may be some surprises. Some things going for stage 1 are concurrency control, which adds like a semaphore, is kind of the primary deliverable of that, but also a more, I have to pull it up, something called the governor, which enables the semaphore. So that's going for stage 1, and then there's an unordered async iterator helpers for stage 1. I'm happy to talk about these things and dive in, but I don't know how, given the limited time, how fruitful, we're going to make use of that time. But does anything stand out about any of those for folks, or would have any questions or thoughts? How do people feel about decimal in the language? Or let me ask this. So Jordan was previously, and I don't know that his position has changed, resistant to advancing to stage 2 because decimal would be added, not as a new primitive to the language. So he remained unconvinced by the other arguments that it should still be added despite not being a primitive.
But there's reasons that it wasn't primitive. Like it tried to be primitive first, right?
Reviewing the slides.
I seem to remember like maybe 2018 it tried to be a primitive, but maybe I'm wrong.
It's definitely not the first time it's been brought to committee, or and historically it was not successful.
I think it's in the explainer why it's not. I mean, it's been a minute since I looked at it. Could be wrong. I could probably not talk about it because my team is also involved in it. So by my team, yeah.
think the argument was that, well, I don't know the argument of why it should not be a primitive. The argument for why it should be a primitive is that just adding it as a non-primitive is going to further fracture the usage of decimal in the ecosystem. So right now you have people using different libraries to accomplish it, and TC39 adding another, they're effectively adding what amounts to, this is the argument, I'm not claiming this, what amounts to effectively another userland library, now fracturing another +1 to the list of implementations that people will use. Whereas if it was added as a primitive, everybody would just use that because it's a primitive.
I wish there was even a way to switch to using that regardless, like without having to opt in, like without having to opt in on a case, on a value by value basis. Like, would you just opt in for a whole module? Then all your numbers use decimal. It would fix it would fix a lot of usability issues with JavaScript, like
like a use decimal directive, basically. Is that
something like that? I'm not sure. I mean, this is the first time I've heard about this, so this is like completely half baked. Actually, this is like 1/10 baked. But that was my first thought. Oh, this is so great for fixing all of these things that that keep confusing people perpetually. And if it's with something like this, you have to know to use it. So I mean, it solves the issues that get people to use a library, but it doesn't solve the learnability issues. I guess with a module-wide opt-in, you would also have to know to use that, but it would become part of like the standard way you write a JavaScript file. I'm just thinking out loud.
I personally do not have particularly strong feelings on this subject. I totally understand the concerns. Yeah, I don't know. Stage 2, arguably you could advance to stage 2 and still change that prior to advancing to 2.7. But also I see the argument that at stage 2, the general API design should be flushed out, and that's a pretty big component of it, whether it's going to be primitive or not. So I get that as well. I don't know. There's also some questions about how it interfaces with big int and big decimal. How those will work together. So yeah, I don't know. We can just leave it at that. Move onwards.
Sounds like anybody who does have strong opinions about it should probably chat with Jordan and then also get engaged on the proposal, which Chris linked in chat, but it's /TC39/proposal-decimal.
I'll just drop the link to the slides for next week as well.
Pop those into NodeStack. All right. As we will run out of time before we know it, Leigh, I wondered if you had any updates you wanted to provide from the tag meeting last week. Was it last week?
Yeah, it was last week in Seattle. It was actually co-located with the AB's meeting and the board of director meeting. So we had some joint meetings as well. I would say as a tag meeting per se, it was as a whole perhaps less productive than other tag meetings, possibly because I have some theories on that. But the good thing is we did have some higher level discussions that needed to happen. I brought up the issue that I feel right now we're not really maximizing our impact to effort ratio, that we're spending our time doing low-level design reviews for things that usually have been extensively reviewed in the working group they came from. And ideally, our impact is much higher when we get to review APIs much earlier on, at the stage where they are still being fleshed out. ideally at the stage where we're not even sure where they fit in the web platform. And I brought it up in a joint AB to tag meeting, and it was generally fairly well received. I think it resonated with a lot of people in the AB as well. So then we discussed it some more with the tag. In terms of more concrete ideas, I proposed a few things. I actually opened an issue. Let me try to find it. There it is. I had it in one of my tabs. So one of the things I've been saying multiple times, and I'm pretty sure I've mentioned it in one of these calls, is I think the tag seems to be the perfect body to be identifying unmet user needs that the web platform doesn't serve. Basically to be analyzing gaps in the platform, because all the groups defining APIs and specs are only seeing a very narrow part of the platform. And the whole point of the tag is that it has this sort of big picture, bird's eye view of the platform as a whole. And often we see people solving similar problems in different parts of the platform. And like, I think ideally, like we need to be able to sort of to identify these kind of bigger picture gaps where working on a lower level part of the platform, like these would never come up. Or often web developers will also complain about very specific problems they face, like I can't do this very specific thing, not a sort of bigger picture lacking. And there was finally consensus about this. We are going to start a repo to identify these. It was also brought up that identifying these is pointless if we don't also do something to get browser buy-in, but this can be done separately. If we don't even record these gaps when we find them, when they come up in discussions, then they're just lost. So we have nothing to bring up with browsers or point people to. So also, I was trying to brainstorm about how we can prioritize earlier reviews, because like I said, right now we're spending a lot of time reviewing very mature specs where we can't really make a difference. We're spending a lot of time reviewing them, but it's mostly wasted time. So telling people not to file later reviews wouldn't go down well for a number of reasons. And it also means it is an important part of the W3C process that gives tag legitimacy that we are part of the horizontal review process, but also horizontal reviews are some of the less impactful reviews that we do. So instead I proposed that we should come up with a scoring system to prioritize design reviews that can have the most impact. So rather than telling people not to file the low impact reviews entirely, we can have a scoring system so that the reviews that can have impact can surface and we can get to them faster. And that was generally well received. The scoring system, having a scoring system as an idea was well received, but the devil's often in the details, and we didn't quite have consensus about the individual factors necessarily. We did have consensus that recent review requests should be prioritized, even though first in, first out would be more fair. The longer a review has been sitting, the less likely it is that our feedback will make a difference. I did suggest we prioritize earlier reviews, which was like the whole point of this, but we didn't quite have consensus on that. There were some people that had some good arguments about this, that sometimes there is no buy-in for something, for a very early on effort. But then it also came up that buy-in could be a factor in this scorecard of sorts. Also, the larger the scope of the feature, the more I proposed that the larger the scope, the higher the priority of the review, like a completely new API, more points, incremental improvement on existing technologies, fewer points, brand new technology, infinity points. But there was also a concern about buy-in in that as well. In general, I think it's kind of hard to get people to agree on individual factors because they tend to see them as all together. Anyway, at least the discussion has started, and I think it will be great for optimizing our time if we can come up with some kind of rubric for prioritization and obviously publish it so that people so that review requesters can also optimize how the time they spend requesting reviews. And in that sense also, I proposed reforming our guidance for explainers. Right now, our process basically assumes that there's a lot of homework happens between calls and between meetings, but in practice, it doesn't really. So most reviews happen synchronously during calls, but the explainers are written for a different process. So I propose that basically we've been trying to change this for many years. It hasn't changed. Maybe we should embrace that this is how reviews happen and change our guidance accordingly so that explainers can be processed in that time without skimming important bits. And that way people can also not spend extra time on them, thinking that the longer the explainer, the better it is for the review. Like, I mean, linking to additional information is definitely encouraged, but there should be a summary that stands by itself and can be processed really quickly. And I think that is good for the explainer in general, because the whole point of explainers is not that this is something just for the tag to review your spec. This is something that is useful for the broader community also. So conciseness is generally useful, and also to really emphasize that there are 3 sections that you really, really need to include. User needs and high-level use cases. Like, don't just tell us we need to get this number, like we need to get a glitchiness per minute or something. Like, what are you going to do with it? What kind of scenarios is this going to be used in? Also, usage examples with actual code using the API, if that makes sense, if there is actual code involved. And alternatives considered. Right now, people don't really realize how important these 3 sections are, because our guidance is, if you look at our guidance, it's just a mess right now. There is no priority. It's like just a big blob of text with like everything that it would be good to include in an explainer. So we should follow our own advice in the explainer and make it more hierarchical and emphasize what is actually important. What else? So generally, there was consensus on that as well, like improving our guidance for explainers and emphasizing conciseness and emphasizing the important sections. There were some discussions again about we have this set of design principles that some of them are very, very high level. As some of you may know, I've also become editor of the design principles document recently. I'm so sorry, Brian. I didn't see your hand because I was looking at
you've got 3 stacked.
Oh my!
Yeah,
I was not looking at the Zoom window. It should really send a notification.
So yeah, I think I think Brian, Chris, and then Toby, because I think it orders it in.
Okay.
Yeah.
So I'm gonna catch up on this. I didn't see a lot of this, so thanks for the pointer. But my immediate question is just like, what does this? Was there any discussion about how this plays into the Blink process? Because like Blink kind of famously requires tag review to.
So
Was
here's
that
the
all
thing.
intense? Yeah.
Blink requires tag review, but it doesn't say anything about the outcome of the tag review. So we get a lot of people that request the tag review and then sort of just go off and implement the thing and ship the thing. And also many times these reviews come to us very late, where the thing is already shipping and announced to be shipping in like the next version of Chrome. And that is part of what I'm hoping to do with this prioritization rubric, that by prioritizing the reviews that actually have impact, we would also deprioritize the reviews where like something's already shipping, or basically the checkbox reviews, the reviews that people file just because it's part of a process, but they don't much care about the outcome. I mean, I think having tag review as part of the shipping process, ideally, not just for Blink, but also for any user agent, I think that would be very beneficial, but it needs to happen at the right point. And it needs to happen by people who have received education on what a design review is and why it's useful. Not just, oh, here's a bullet point. You need to ask for this. Why do I need to ask for this? And often we get design reviews because of the Blink shipping process, where the requester has no connection to the actual spec writer and to the actual spec editor. So we give them feedback, And then it's like, yeah, I don't know what to do with this feedback. It's like, then why? Anyway, does that answer your question?
Yeah, totally. I mean, I was just curious if there had been some thought and discussion around that, like even with people from Blink, because I know, you know, how integrated it was. And I mean, I have some similar, like not entirely dissimilar feelings on some of the things that you brought up. So I was just curious.
Well, I think the message from this should not be don't file the reviews. It should be, A, make sure that people file the reviews, understand why they're filing them, and also prioritize them accordingly. Like part of the reason why it feels like such a fire hose is because we have no prioritization really. Like the prioritization we're doing is very ad hoc. It takes very few variables into account. So it doesn't work. Toby, you also had your hands up, but now it seems to be down.
Yeah, well, getting at time, and I don't think what I was going to say adds much. Chris.
I
Chris?
have my hand up. So I'm just going to talk about, I wanted to talk about the scoring rubric for a second. So I think they can work well, they do work well when they're scoring things that are very consistent and parameterized, right? And they're very similar types of things that you're scoring. But the tag is asked to review very different types of proposals in different contexts. So we can imagine that we'll likely want the scores assigned for certain criteria to be different depending on those contexts, potentially. So have you considered using a non-scoring rubric? Because even without assigning scoring and values, just the exercise of documenting each of those things is usually enough to prioritize, like at least roughly. You might not be able to say if A and is above B, but maybe you can say like this group of things is clearly has a higher priority than these group of things, and you can avoid kind of bike shedding over the individual point scoring and things like that.
So some kind of qualitative scoring would definitely still be more useful than what we do today. But the thinking was that if we have a quantitative scoring, then we could also use it to make sure that issues surface in a sort of automated way. We could build tooling around it. I mean, the factors that don't necessarily all have to be public. We could have like a private spreadsheet with some of them, but having something quantitative would help to surface certain things that are important that right now are going into the abyss. It doesn't mean that if we have a scorecard, it has to be binding. It doesn't mean we cannot always like decide that, hey, this got a low score, but we think it's very important and we should prioritize it. Like I see a scoring rubric as something that will help us, not something that will constrain us. It's just another data point that we could take into account.
Yeah, I was just trying to think of like ways to sort of it sounded like there was potential blocking on the disagreement about how much the different criteria should be worth. And that's what I was sort of kind of responding to. You know, and maybe you go to like a weighted scoring, like, okay, we're marking this thing, this category is worth these many points, but you can sort of weight it between like 1, 2, or 3 in terms of how you feel that thing is important. And
the idea is definitely weighted. Like you cannot come up with a scorecard where all the factors have the same weight. Like that is not useful. Like they need to have different weights. Some of them are vastly more important than others.
No, what I meant is that leaving the weighting open for like when you're filling it out and saying, so you have like assign a static point value for like this thing, but then you weight that as well specifically on your, you know, how keep it really simple, like a 1, 2, or a 3, for example, on how important you think it applies to that rubric. I'm just trying to offer some flexibility to maybe for lack of a better word, unblock the difficulty in trying to assign those values and the disagreements on where things should fit.
I think it's normal to have to not reach consensus immediately in like the first discussion about something like that. So I'm optimistic. If we keep discussing it and we still can't reach consensus, that's another story. But like in the very first discussion, I was just trying to capture which ones we may have consensus on without discussing it very much, just so we know where we stand. It's not like we went into a lot of depth about which ones, about debating the pros and cons of each of them. Oh, and another discussion that started but didn't quite yet conclude, the topic of collaborating with other groups for design principles came up again. We made some progress about how to collaborate with the CSS group, but there's still open. It's still open how to collaborate with groups defining JavaScript APIs, which is a much bigger issue, and it's much harder to do because A, there's so many groups defining JavaScript APIs, and B, right now the design principles are structured entirely using WebIDL, which is very web browser focused and like focused around technologies that ship in browsers. It is not, as far as I know, WebIDL is not used by TC39, right? Yeah, so the way that our principles are written right now is excluding TC39 folks outright. And there was pushback when I proposed changing it to something that doesn't. So that is a little tricky. But in terms of collaborating with other groups, like it was proposed that we perhaps should open issues, like we should have a discussion with the group obviously first, but then when it's a big group like the CSS group, we should open issues in the repo about design principles, have them so that they can be added to telcons and discussed and resolved on, because it is not a good process to have each group maintain its own principles and then the tag maintains separate principles, but also we cannot define these in isolation. So that is a problem that I don't quite know how to solve. But there were some discussions about that. What else? I think those were the things that I wanted to mention that were relevant to this group. I mean, we also did some design reviews and opened some design principles PRs, but that is too low level.
Is there anything the JavaScript community could do to support you, help you address this underlying problem?
I mean, they could participate more in the design principles repo. There's a lot of open issues. And I think the more they participate in these, the more their perspective will be captured in the actual principles, because we have WG people participating more, at least. So I worry that their perspective is represented disproportionately. Like ideally, we should have both perspectives because both are defining JavaScript APIs for the web. And my concern is that to web developers, this makes no difference. Like they don't care if an API was defined by TC39 or WG. And to them, the temporal API and the DOM are both JavaScript APIs. They don't see the difference. And yet they're defined with completely different principles.
So I'm really sorry,
Not
but
quite true, Brian. Some of them are. I actually made a page many years ago when I first joined the tag, which shows all of the people that have ever been in the tag. It is in /history.
Some are also former TC39 people.
Yeah.
that's interesting.
So
We are 5 minutes over. I'm so sorry. But because this certainly is very topical. I think Leia's point that getting involved on this repository, how to support the tag with the refined review process, I think we should dive more into this. I'm going to put it on the agenda for next week. I did want to, before we conclude, note that we are going to be updating this calendar invite from a Zoom account, which has been kind of managed on the back end by the program management team, to a different tool called LF Meeting Management. And that would allow us to sort of make sure that in the absence of someone from the OpenJS Foundation, that the invite and the meeting can still continue. So it'll still be an open invite link. You know, don't have to join or anything, but just giving you all a heads up that we're going to move that to LFX, and I will update the ticket, which is issue number 292 when that's done, but just as an FYI. So hopefully next week or next 2 weeks from now. Yeah, these balloons and things, I don't know what it is. Zoom does all these like funny tricks with emojis. Like if I do a peace sign.
Zoom recently added a send with effect feature.
Yeah.
Which is awesome.
Every now and then I'll like make a movement and then all of a sudden there'll be some like extra stuff that happens and I can't figure out how to make it happen on purpose. So yeah, exactly. Like if you, yeah, well, so yeah, anyway. So those features will continue to exist in the new Zoom invite that you all will get in a few weeks. So in the meantime, we will conclude during this meeting. I will say thank you to everyone who joined in on YouTube and close out